The blade gleamed in Derek Stone's hand, as Queen Victoria's words echoed through the command chamber. 17 colonies, 4 million souls, all burned because we cannot touch him. Her voice carried the weight of an empire bleeding at its edges. Derek stood at attention, his jaw tight, eyes fixed on the holographic display rotating before them. The Krythak Warlord Thexnar the Untouchable towered in the projection, his obsidian armor gleaming beneath the shimmer of his legendary shield. "Every assassination team we've sent has failed," the Queen continued, her fingers drumming against the armrest of her throne. "Plasma rounds, kinetic strikes, antimatter charges. The shield adapts before the weapons even fire. It reads neural patterns, hostile intent, the electrical impulses in a shooter's brain. By the time you decide to pull a trigger, you're already dead." Derek had studied the reports. 53 attempts across 8 species. 53 failures. The best killers in the galaxy, reduced to ashes or scattered atoms before they could complete their strikes. The shield wasn't just technology. It was something more, something that violated every principle of physics humanity understood. "You're sending me to die," Derek said flatly. It wasn't a question. Queen Victoria rose from her throne, descending the steps until she stood directly before him. She was shorter than Derek by half a foot, but her presence filled the room. "I'm sending you to do what no one else can. You're the only soldier I have who might find a way." She placed a hand on his shoulder, her grip firm. "I'm not ordering you, Derek. I'm asking, will you go?" Derek looked past her to the viewing window where Earth hung in the darkness, blue and fragile. Somewhere down there, his sister Rachel tended a garden with her 2 children, unaware that the Krythak fleet was 3 systems away and closing. He thought of the colonies that had burned, the screams that had echoed across subspace channels before going silent forever. "I'll find a way," he said. The Queen nodded once, and Derek saw something rare in her eyes, hope mixed with grief. She knew what she was asking. She knew the odds. But humanity had run out of options, and sometimes the only path forward was through the impossible. 3 days later, Derek floated in the cargo hold of a captured Krythak supply vessel, his body pressed against the cold metal, breathing slow and measured. The ship stank of ammonia and something else, something organic and rotten that made his stomach churn. He'd allowed himself to be processed as a slave, his identification chipped, his body marked with the brands that signified human livestock. The Krythak dealt in flesh as readily as they dealt in weapons, and the supply chain that fed their war machine was vast and indifferent. Derek's cover was perfect because it was real. He was property now, heading toward the flagship where Thexnar ruled from his throne of conquered worlds. The transport docked with a shudder that rattled Derek's teeth. Gravity plating engaged, and he fell hard against the deck, along with 24 other humans who'd been collected from processing centers across the fringe territories. Guards in black armor herded them through corridors that pulsed with bioluminescent veins, the ship itself a living thing grown as much as built. Derek kept his head down, his movements slow and defeated. He'd spent weeks learning to embody brokenness, to wear despair like a second skin. Any hint of defiance, any spark of resistance, and he'd be culled before ever seeing his target. They were sorted in a massive chamber where thousands of slaves moved in coordinated patterns, maintaining systems, hauling cargo, cleaning the organic residue that accumulated in the ship's living passages. Derek was assigned to waste reclamation, the lowest work, the kind that broke spirits within days. He worked 16-hour shifts, his hands raw, his body aching, and all the while he watched. He observed the guard rotations, the patterns of movement through the ship, the places where security thinned, and he waited for a glimpse of his target. On the 4th day, the Warlord appeared. Thexnar moved through the slave deck like a dark god surveying his domain, flanked by honor guards whose weapons could vaporize a human in microseconds. But it was the shield that captured Derek's attention. A faint distortion in the air around the Warlord's body, barely visible except when light caught it at certain angles. It rippled and shifted, responding to threats Derek couldn't even see. A slave stumbled too close, and the shield flared, throwing the unfortunate soul across the chamber to crash against a bulkhead with a wet crack. No one moved to help. No one even looked. This was the reality of Krythak mercy. Derek forced himself to feel nothing, to observe without anger. without the spike of rage that wanted to tear through his control. The shield would sense it. The shield would know. He turned back to his work hauling waste containers and began to understand the enormity of his task. You couldn't hide hatred from something that read your mind faster than you could think it. You couldn't disguise intent from a system designed to detect the electrical whisper of hostile thought. Every conventional approach had failed, because every conventional approach relied on the attacker maintaining their purpose, their focus, their will to kill. And the moment that will crystallized, the shield struck. That night, crammed into a sleeping cube with 50 other slaves, Derek began the work that would either save him or drive him mad. He started meditating. Not the casual relaxation exercises taught in basic training, but something deeper, something he'd learned from a Tibetan monk during his years in special operations. He dove into his own mind, mapping the territory of his thoughts, identifying the patterns that constituted Derek Stone, his memories, his drives, his burning need for vengeance. And then, slowly, carefully, he began to build walls, not to suppress his emotions, but to compartmentalize them, to create separate rooms in the architecture of his consciousness where different truths could exist simultaneously. Days blurred into weeks. Derek worked, observed, and meditated. He ate the nutrient paste that tasted like rust and despair. He endured the casual cruelty of guards who viewed humans as less than animals. And through it all, he practiced the impossible discipline of holding two thoughts at once. The surface calm of a broken slave, and beneath it, buried so deep it was almost invisible even to himself, the coiled spring of lethal intent. He had to believe, genuinely believe that he meant no harm, not pretend, not act. Actually believe it, while simultaneously maintaining the capacity for violence. In the third week, Derek met someone who changed everything. The man was dying. That much was obvious from the gray pallor of his skin and the way he moved with careful, painful precision. His name was Kofi, and he'd been a physicist before the Krythak took his world. They worked side by side in the waste reclamation bay, and over stolen moments of conversation, Derek learned that Kofi had spent years studying the shield technology from his position as a slave. "It's quantum entanglement," Kofi whispered one night, his voice barely audible over the thrumming of the ship's engines. "The shield doesn't just read neural patterns. It's connected to them, entangled at the subatomic level the moment you enter its field. Your hostile thoughts become part of the system, and the system responds before your muscles can even contract." Derek felt ice slide down his spine. "Then, it's impossible. You can't attack without intent," Kofi smiled, a broken expression that showed too many missing teeth. "Not impossible. Just paradoxical. You need intent, but the intent can't be conscious. It has to be buried so deep that even you don't know it's there until the moment of action. A reflex, a programmed response, triggered by external stimulus, not internal decision." He coughed, and blood flecked his lips. "I've been trying to train myself for 2 years. Never succeeded. The mind won't cooperate. We're not built for that kind of split." "What if you had help?" Derek asked. "What if someone guided the process?" Kofi looked at him with sudden clarity, seeing past the slave facade to the soldier beneath. "You're not here by accident, are you?" Derek said nothing, but Kofi nodded slowly. "Then listen carefully. I don't have much time left, and you're going to need every technique I know." Over the next 10 days, as Kofi's condition deteriorated, Derek underwent the most intensive mental training of his life. The physicist had studied meditation practices from a dozen cultures, neurolinguistic programming, hypnosis, even experimental consciousness techniques developed by pre-war research labs. Together they crafted a protocol designed to do what should have been impossible, to bury Derek's killing intent so deep in his subconscious that it became a reflex action, triggered not by thought but by a specific sensory cue. The trigger would be simple, the scent of ozone that Thexnar's shield generated at close range. When Derek smelled it, his body would act, his hand would move, the blade would strike. And his conscious mind, the part that the shield could read, would remain perfectly calm, genuinely believing he meant no harm. The night Kofi died, Derek held the old man's hand in the darkness of the sleeping cube. "Make it count," Kofi whispered, his eyes already glazing. 17 colonies. Make it count, Derek promised. and meant it with every fiber of his being. When the body was removed the next morning, Derek felt the weight of those deaths added to his own. Everyone who had helped him, everyone who had died hoping someone would stop the slaughter. The weight should have crushed him. Instead, it crystallized into something harder than diamond, buried beneath layers of enforced calm where the shield could never touch it. 3 days later, opportunity arrived. Thexnar announced a ceremony, a celebration of his latest conquest. The slave population would be required to attend, to witness Krythak's superiority, to understand their place in the new order. Derek spent the morning in meditation, his breathing slow, his heartbeat steady. He reviewed his conditioning one final time, checking each mental compartment, ensuring the walls were solid. His conscious mind felt nothing but exhaustion and quiet resignation. Beneath that, buried in the darkness where conscious thought couldn't reach, the weapon waited. The ceremony took place in the grand amphitheater, a vast space where bioluminescent growths created shifting patterns of light across organic walls. Thousands of slaves stood in ordered ranks while Thexnar held court from a raised platform, his shield shimmering like heat haze. He spoke in the clicking, guttural language of his people, his words translated through implants that every slave carried. He spoke of destiny, of the Krythak right to rule, of the weakness of species that couldn't adapt, and then, to demonstrate that weakness, he ordered prisoners brought forward. Derek watched from his place in the ranks as 3 humans were dragged to the platform. A woman, a child no more than 12. The crowd of Krythak nobles chittered with anticipation. Derek forced himself to feel compassion, sorrow, helplessness, all the emotions a broken slave should feel. Nothing that would register as threat, nothing that would trigger the shield. The woman died first, her neck snapped with casual efficiency. The man lasted longer, his screams echoing until Thexnar tired of the game, and then the warlord reached for the child. Something in the crowd shifted. A Krythak servant stumbled, jostling the line of slaves. Guards moved to restore order, and in the confusion, Derek found himself pushed forward, closer to the platform, close enough to smell the ozone tang of the shield generator. The trigger scent hit his nostrils and Derek's body moved. His conscious mind remained perfectly calm, watching with detached curiosity as his hand dipped into the seam of his clothing where he'd hidden a shard of sharpened ceramic, a fragment salvaged from broken waste containers and honed over weeks. He felt no anger, no fear, no intent whatsoever. He was simply moving, his body executing a programmed sequence, while his thoughts remained as still as a frozen lake. He stepped onto the platform. A guard turned, but Derek's posture was submissive, his face blank. He approached Thexnar, who towered over him, still holding the child by the throat. Derek's hand came up in what looked like a gesture of supplication. The shield didn't react. Why would it? Derek meant no harm. He genuinely believed it, his conscious mind wrapped in layers of conditioned calm. The ceramic blade passed through the shield as though it didn't exist, sliding between the plates of obsidian armor, finding the gap Kofi had identified from stolen schematics, piercing the primary neural cluster that controlled Krythak motor function. Thexnar's eyes widened in shock. The child dropped from his grasp. The warlord tried to speak, but his vocal cords had already ceased responding. He toppled backward, his massive body crashing to the platform floor, and the shield flickered, wavered, and died. For 3 heartbeats, the amphitheater existed in perfect silence. Then chaos erupted. Guards fired wildly, killing slaves and servants in their panic. Derek felt the first plasma bolt sear across his ribs, the pain bright and clarifying. He dove for cover, but there was nowhere to go. A second shot caught his leg, spinning him around. He hit the deck hard, his vision swimming, and waited for the killing blow. It never came. The Krythak guards were turning on each other, different factions screaming accusations, old rivalries surfacing in the power vacuum. Thexnar had ruled through fear and strength, and with him dead, the carefully maintained hierarchy shattered. Derek crawled through the carnage, his leg dragging, his side burning. He had to move, had to escape, had to get the intelligence he'd gathered back to Queen Victoria. The assassination was only the beginning. The real war started now. He found a maintenance tunnel and pulled himself inside, sealing the hatch behind him. His hands shook as he activated the emergency beacon hidden in his dental work. a tiny transmitter that would broadcast his location to any human vessel within range. Then he allowed himself to collapse, his body finally surrendering to the injuries it had sustained. He'd done it. The impossible. The invincible enemy lay dead. But as darkness crept into the edges of his vision, Derek wondered if he'd ever be able to undo what he'd done to his own mind, if the compartments he'd built would ever open again, or if he'd trapped part of himself forever in those buried depths. The extraction team found him 18 hours later, unconscious and half-dead from blood loss. They carried him aboard a stealth corvette and jumped to hyperspace before the Krythak could organize pursuit. Derek drifted in and out of consciousness during the journey home, his dreams full of Kofi's face and the child's terrified eyes, and the wet sound of the ceramic blade sliding home. The ship's medic worked to stabilize him, muttering about infection and trauma, and how Derek should have been dead hours ago. But Derek had stopped listening. He was counting instead, adding up the cost in his mind. 17 colonies lost, 4 million dead, 53 failed assassination attempts, 1 success. One broken soldier coming home. When he finally woke in the medical bay on Luna Station, Queen Victoria was sitting beside his bed. She looked older than he remembered, the weight of command carving deeper lines into her face. "You did it," she said simply. Derek tried to speak, but his throat was raw. She held a cup of water to his lips, and he drank gratefully. "The Krythak fleet is in disarray," she continued. 3 factions fighting for control. Their supply lines are collapsing. We've already retaken 2 systems. She paused, studying his face. "You gave us a chance, Derek. A real chance." "The method," Derek croaked. "Don't let it spread. If they learn how," Victoria nodded. "The technique dies with you. I've already classified everything. As far as the galaxy knows, you found a weak point in the shield generator. Nothing about the mental conditioning. Nothing about the paradox." She squeezed his hand. "We'll need you to train others, eventually. Not in the method, but in the discipline, in the determination to do what seems impossible." Derek closed his eyes, exhausted. "How many more?" he asked. "How many more wars?" Victoria had no answer for that. Instead, she stayed with him until he slept, her hand warm in his, a silent promise that his sacrifice had meaning. The interrogation started 3 days later. The Krythak had captured Derek during his escape attempt, dragging him to their intelligence division before the extraction team could reach him. The details were classified, but the scars told their own story. Burns, breaks, neural damage that left his hands with a permanent tremor. He'd endured 14 hours of the most sophisticated torture the Krythak possessed. Their interrogators desperate to understand how a human slave had bypassed technology that had never failed. Derek had given them nothing. Not a word. Not a hint. He'd buried the truth so deep that even pain couldn't extract it, his mind fragmenting under the assault but never breaking completely. When the extraction team finally breached the detention center, they found him strapped to a table, his body ruined but his secrets intact. The recovery took months. Physical therapy to relearn basic motor control. Psychological counseling to address the trauma that woke him screaming most nights. Derek endured it all with the same determination he'd brought to the mission, grinding forward when every instinct said to quit. Queen Victoria visited weekly, bringing reports from the front. The Krythak factions had collapsed into civil war. Humanity was pushing back, reclaiming territory, building alliances with other species who'd suffered under Thexnar's rule. The tide was turning, slowly but unmistakably. Derek listened and nodded and said little. He was proud of what he'd accomplished. But pride couldn't erase the cost. 6 months after his return, Derek stood in the training center beneath Victoria Station, facing 12 soldiers hand-picked from special operations units across human space. They were the best of the best, men and women who'd volunteered for a program they didn't fully understand, who'd been told only that they would learn to defeat impossible enemies. Derek looked at their faces, young, determined, unbroken, and felt ancient. "What I'm going to teach you," he began, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands, "has nothing to do with weapons or tactics. It's about the mind, about will, about finding strength in places you didn't know existed." He paused, remembering Kofi's final words. We're going to make you into something the galaxy has never seen. Champions who can stand against the darkness and win. They trained for 8 weeks, learning meditation techniques and mental discipline, studying the psychology of impossible situations, conditioning their minds to maintain calm under circumstances that would shatter ordinary people. Derek pushed them harder than any instructor had a right to push, because he knew what waited in the darkness between stars. He knew the enemies that would come, the challenges that would test everything humanity had built. And he knew that raw courage wasn't enough. You needed something deeper, something unbreakable. By the end of training, all 12 graduates could maintain perfect calm while their world burned around them, could hold contradictory truths in their minds simultaneously, could do what Derek had done, not the specific technique which remained classified, the refusal to accept defeat, the will to find a way when no way existed. The graduation ceremony was small, attended only by Queen Victoria and a handful of senior officers who understood what these soldiers represented. Victoria presented each graduate with a simple medal, a circle of steel with Earth at the center, surrounded by stars. "You are the answer," she told them. "To everyone who says humanity can't compete with ancient empires and superior technology, you are proof that what we lack in power, we make up for in determination, in creativity, in the absolute refusal to surrender." She turned to Derek, who stood at attention despite the pain that still plagued his injured leg. "And you are the first, the champion who showed us the way." Derek accepted the recognition with a nod, but his thoughts were elsewhere. He was thinking about Rachel and her children, safely tending their garden under Earth's sky. He was thinking about the colonies that would be rebuilt, the lives that would continue because he'd done the impossible. He was thinking about Kofi, who'd given everything to make the mission succeed, whose name would never appear in the history books but whose contribution was absolute. And he was thinking about the cost, the parts of himself he'd sacrificed, the scars visible and invisible that would mark him forever. Worth it, he decided. Every bit of it. Because humanity survived. Because the darkness had retreated. Because sometimes, when everything seemed lost, one person could change the course of history. That night, Derek stood alone in the observation deck, watching Earth rotate slowly in the viewport. The planet looked peaceful from orbit, unmarred by the wars that had raged across the galaxy. He touched the metal on his chest, feeling the cool metal under his fingers. Somewhere out there, new threats were gathering. New enemies who believed themselves invincible. And when they came, humanity would be ready. Not because they had better weapons or stronger shields, but because they had people willing to do whatever it took, to pay whatever price was necessary, to stand against the impossible and win. Derek smiled, a thin expression that didn't quite reach his eyes, and turned away from the viewport. There was work to do, always more work. But tonight, just for a moment, he allowed himself to rest. The champion who'd killed an untouchable enemy. The soldier who'd done what no one believed possible. The man who'd proved that humanity's greatest weapon wasn't technology or numbers, but the unbreakable will to survive.